In this lesson, go ahead and open up a document called opacityblendingmodes.ai. I would like to talk about something that, well, strictly it isn't part of the layers panel, and I know we're in a chapter on layers, but it is in another program that you're probably, or a lot of you are anyway, familiar with, and that's Adobe Photoshop. If you go into the layers panel in Adobe Photoshop, at the basic top of the panel, you will see blending modes and you will see an opacity setting. Now, you do have those options in this program. They are located in the transparency panel right here. So let me go ahead and stick that one over here. One of the questions I get is, why are they separate? I mean, what was the reasoning behind separating them in Illustrator but not in Photoshop? Well, think of how the programs work. Adobe Photoshop is a raster-based program. You're putting paint on a canvas. I mean, I know it's pixels and digital, but paint on a canvas. So everything is in that layer. In Adobe Illustrator, the program is object-oriented. Therefore, each piece, even though they're in the same layer, stands on its own. So in Photoshop, blending modes and opacity must be applied to the entire layer. Each layer can have its own. But in Illustrator, every object can have its own blending mode and transparency or opacity settings. So that's why it's in a separate panel, but I still think it relates to what we're talking about. Now, just quick, I've got 3 colored circles up here. These are objects: solid red, solid green, and solid blue, and I've got a black backdrop behind it to help us see them. If I select them and come over here to transparency, I can now control the blending modes or the opacity of the selected objects in that layer. And even though this guy here, this bird, is in the same layer, he won't be impacted because he's not selected. So it's about selection. If I come over here, you can see you've got quite a few. As a matter of fact, they keep adding a few more every so often, so we get more. And Photoshop's got more than this, but that's fine. If I go to screen, for example, what we're doing is we're screening the colors based on where they overlap. And so now you see red, green, and blue, cyan, magenta, and yellow, which are the additive and subtractive color sets. If we select them again, you can play around. That's the best way to work with this. If I go to, say, luminosity. Luminosity works with the luminosity values of the colors, not their color per se. And so we're getting shades of gray based on the original colors as opposed to the colors themselves. I always tell my students the best thing to do here is play. Try different ones and see what you get. Now, if we go back to screen just for a second, as you can see, as I move them, well, they're changing based on where they overlap. Blending modes are, well, they're a lot of fun to work with, I'll tell you that. I had at university an entire semester where we talked just about blending modes in these programs because they are so creative. Now, the other one we have is opacity. So I have a nice big bird down here. I suppose we could try a blending mode on him too. If we go up to normal and try maybe something like overlay, kind of looks like he's behind the pattern, but when you look at the colors of these weaves compared to here, you can see they are different. Let's take that back to normal. You can actually combine opacity and blending modes, of course. But if I want to make him look a little bit more soft against that pattern, since he's on top, then just change the opacity. Maybe go down to about 60%. And he begins softly going away. But if there's something behind him, it begins appearing. Blending modes, opacity, a separate panel, simply because Adobe Illustrator is object-oriented, not layer-oriented. That's probably not a good way to say that, but it's true. Layers in Photoshop, objects in Illustrator. On to the next.